So I have a bit of a confession to make. Despite all the various different types of 3D printers that I have bought, received for review, or even built throughout the history of this channel, there is still one type of consumer 3D printer that I have never actually played with at all. And that is belt printers. Now, I know that there have been different belt printers to come out. I know Creality came out with one that was mass produced, but overall, they really haven't seen too much mass adoption.
Belts! Belts! Belts!
So when IdeaFormer reached out and let me know that they have a brand new modernized version of their 3D printing platform, a belt printer that also takes into consideration all the advancements and developments that consumer 3D printing has seen in the last couple of years, I was pretty excited, and they did agree to send over this printer and sponsor it so that you and I could have our first look into the future of belt 3D printing. So why don't we go ahead and get this thing unboxed and see what it has to offer. Oh, and by the way, if you do hear a bunch of noise off camera, I do apologize. I'm currently testing about 3 different unreleased printers, which are making a ton of noise, but do make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss out on those videos coming very soon. All right, let's get after it. First, belt printer. Oh, that's heavy. Triangle ruler to measure if we're 45 degrees. Provided. All right, so we have this thing pretty much assembled and ready to power up. Now I'm gonna put some hours on it and I will be right back through the magic of video editing to share with you some of my impressions and what I made.
One day later.
Okay, so I've done a few prints on this guy, and as you can see, I am doing a whole bunch more testing, but while we wait for all of those prints to print out, let's go ahead and talk about the tech specs just a little bit. Now, as far as build volume, the IR3 V2 can do 250 by 250 by infinity, but do note that the first 2 numbers are what you would think of as X and Y. They're actually not X and Y, but the infinity number is what we would think of as the Y and what it thinks of as the Z. It's a little bit confusing, but the slicer just takes care of all of that, so you don't actually need to think about what axis is what to the printer. Now, the machine's footprint by itself is 675 by 436 by 510 without the optional add-on of the conveyor belt type thing. And just the machine itself without this add-on is 18 kilos. Yes, 18 kilos. Now, as far as mechanical properties, as you can see, it uses linear rails on the... Honestly, I'm not sure what axis this is. Is it Z, I guess? Somewhere between Z and Y. Well, it uses linear rails on this axis and then linear rods and bearings on the X axis, as well as very, very sturdy aluminum extrusions. The bed does seem to be made out of actual metal, which is then coated in PTFE, so bed adhesion is honestly the same as any other printer that you'll get these days. Also, unlike past IdeaFormer machines, this one does feature a direct drive extruder, filament runout sensor, etc., etc. Now, the hot end has a unique heat break, but it does use V6 nozzles, which is a relief. Just do note that they're not really standard V6 nozzles because they have a unique profile to account for the 45-degree angle. The printer does ship with 2 extra nozzles because you're unlikely to have extras on hand, but I would have liked to see those as a 0.6 or at least one 0.6 provided as an option. Keep in mind, this isn't a review, but that's just a piece of feedback that I am going to be passing along to IdeaFormer as well. Now, the hot end on this can reach 300C and the bed 90C, so with an optional enclosure, which IdeaFormer does sell, you can actually even print ABS with this machine. Now, the printing speed is a max of 400 millimeters a second and a max acceleration of 15,000 millimeters per second cubed, but the profiles provided have it printing at around 200 to 250 with accelerations of 8,000 millimeters a second cubed. which is in line with most modern printers, short of maybe the most cutting-edge fast Core XY or Delta machines. Now, to help this machine keep up with the changing times, I was happy to see that the IR3 V2 runs a very up-to-date release of Clipper and Clipper screen, although it does ship with Fluid, which I personally don't like as much. Now, the repo is slightly modified, but SSH is available for you, the consumer, if you want to install upgrades like Octo Everywhere, Mainsail, or Moonraker Timelapse. The printer also does ship with an LED light bar, and mine did come with a generic USB webcam that works fine, but you can upgrade to any USB webcam if you like. I guess, honestly, besides the format, the only other unusual thing about this machine so far is that it doesn't use any of the slicers that you or I have likely used before, like Orca Slicer or Prusa Slicer. It actually uses IdeaMaker by Raise 3D. Now, I assume that this is because other slicers maybe don't yet support belt printers, but I'm not actually sure why. Again, this isn't a review, but I will say that the IdeaMaker slicer is pretty good, but there has been a slight learning curve coming from all the other slicers that I'm so familiar with. For example, at least on my Mac, it doesn't seem to have a lot of keyboard shortcuts set up, so you actually have to click the move button to move a model or click the scale button to scale it. You can't just move it by dragging or press S to scale. It also isn't quite as intuitive to customize profiles and print settings as, say, Orca Slicer, but it does everything you need to, and you can even get it to send prints to the printer wirelessly. Though I actually haven't figured out if or how I can get it to appear within the slicer like I do with Orca Slicer or now Prusa Slicer. It is a little bit of a bummer to have to learn yet another slicer and have yet another slicer on my computer, if I'm honest, but I actually don't fault IdeaFormer for it because Prusa Slicer and Orca Slicer don't seem to support belt slicing, and if that's the case, then I guess their only other option is to either use a slicer that does, like IdeaMaker, or hire developers to port that code into Orca Slicer and then submit a pull request. Hint, hint.
Several days later.
Okay, so I have now put a little over 30 hours on this machine, and while that is definitely not enough for a full review, I do want to take some time and show you some of the cool things that I have printed so far and share what I've learned about belt printing along the way. So, of course, as is required by international 3D printing law, my first print was a 3D Benchy. And it turned out, honestly, amazing. The pre-sliced one was not very aggressive speed-wise, taking, I think, around 40 minutes or so, but the end result is just as beautiful as any Benchy you are likely to see anywhere else, except for that this one has some interesting stuff going on in the back area. You can see that the way that the layers stack up here, even though it is what we would consider a very minimal overhang for normal printers, the direction and orientation of that overhang makes it a little bit tricky for a belt printer to actually stack those layers up nicely. So that is something that you do need to keep in mind when you orient your parts. This printer can do overhangs, but not as well in some directions versus others. The next thing I printed is this awesome back scratcher, linked in the description, by the way, for those of you who want to print one of your own. And I printed it out of some gorgeous Cookie CAD transition gradient glitter filament. And I think it turned out, honestly, spectacular. Obviously, I wanted to test out printing a long, extended item, so I did scale this thing up to 0.5 meters long, which is a good bit longer than any of the other printers that I currently have on hand, and honestly, wow. The print quality here is unbelievable. I honestly wasn't expecting this kind of quality based on what I'd heard about belt printers in the past, especially not on this curved part, which would be a huge problem for a normal 3D printer. I actually even had my friend Sergey over, who can usually find fault with literally every single thing I 3D print, even on my most advanced and well-calibrated printers. And even Sergey agreed that this thing looks pretty amazing. The only flaw, and this was another learning point for me, is this tiny little bit of issue on the leading edge of the print, which as you can see is rounded. Clearly, as you can see here, it was pretty hard for the printer to get started on a rounded edge because there's not so much for it to stick to the build plate. And you'll see in a minute, that's actually a recurring challenge. So rounded stuff is a challenge to consider when you orient or design your models for these printers, though you can probably just add a manual custom brim for just that leading edge. Now, did I need this thing to be 1/2 meter long? No. But is it super awesome at scratching every part of my back? Yes. Okay, cool. We're learning, and that's the idea behind this video. So up next, I did decide to put this printer to work printing some actual stuff that I actually needed because, as you know, if you've been around here for a while, I don't really like to waste filament printing silly stuff just because. Now, right now, I am testing a lot of new printers in the background here, one of which is a very large multicolor printer that poops. So I wanted to print out a bunch of these links for a ducting pipe solution out of PETG to direct the poop into a bin on the side since the printer has no room on the back. Now I loaded up this model and a couple just like it, but already during slicing, I started to see that things were going to be a little bit tricky. My first attempts to print failed miserably, and again, because of the physics of starting the print on a curved surface, it just didn't want to work, and there wasn't enough bed adhesion. Unfortunately, IdeaMaker actually can't generate a brim for belt printers, so I did have to model out my own brim, which really wasn't too hard. And once I did manage to get the prints to stick to the bed just fine. With that said, as you can see here, I did still have some major issues and obviously some learning to do as far as the limitations of printing at a 45-degree angle, because the curves of these links just didn't work. The filament really doesn't have enough overlap from one layer to the next at this point in the print here. And to be fair, I think that this model is just way too thin to be printed in this orientation on this type of printer. And even when I printed models like this on my other printers, some of them did snap when I tried to assemble them. So again, really, really thin walls. But again, not a big deal. This is why we're here. We're learning about the different strengths and weaknesses of a new type of printer, and that's half the fun of this channel, honestly. So with that bit of new understanding and learning, I went on to the next round of things that I needed printed around the office. Now, as you guys know, I tend to like to adorn my walls everywhere I go with honeycomb storage walls, either for decoration or for practical purposes of actually hanging up my tools. So I'm in the process of actually spinning up an entire additional wall on the other side of the studio here. Now in the past, I've had issues with alignment when assembling really large walls of panels with many, many small panels. You can actually see behind me that this wall isn't actually fully straight and some of the segments are under pressure. So I thought to myself, wouldn't it be amazing if this printer could print a massive HSW panel that would run the entire length of the wall? That way, I'd actually only have to level it horizontally and then stack additional ones vertically. Plus, I'd need to drill many, many fewer holes in these hard concrete walls, and I also wouldn't have this busy look that I have going on now with so many four-way junctions connecting all the panels and crowding the entire board. But just to be safe, because I was wary of the whole thin wall issue, I did decide to test it with one panel. Well, at least I thought I was testing it with one panel. See, I couldn't figure out why the slicer said 32 hours and 1/2 kilo of filament, and I just chalked it up to some kind of weird bug, till I came in the next morning and found 2.5 of these panels waiting for me. So note to self, even if you turn off sequential printing in the software, you do also need to make sure to check how many copies of the item you have in the objects window, because they won't show up on the slicer. Anyways, these printed out more or less perfectly, which was enough of a proof of concept for me. So now I can either print large panels for the entire length of a wall using the extension conveyor, which you can see I've installed, or print these sequentially to fit in tight areas. After all, in the past, I have tried printing these out in stacks, but I always manage to screw up the slicer setting that tells the slicer to actually print the top and bottom layers, even though it's a stacked assembly. So I do end up with a lot of these panels that don't have any top or bottom layers, which is kind of ugly. So yeah, considering how easy it is to just punch in the number of these panels that I want, or even add models later to the queue if I need some odds and ends for the corners, I definitely think I'm going to be printing all my future HSW panels on this thing instead of having to constantly load and unload printers every 2 hours. With that said, this whole thin wall issue was still bothering me, and I really wanted to get to the bottom of it so I understand going forward what I can and can't print. So I printed this kind of wacky jewelry box that my sister-in-law asked for using the IR3 V2, and to my surprise, it actually turned out almost perfect. Yes, there are some rough edges, and the overhang chamfer didn't print quite well, but I probably could have used supports there, and overall, I think with a quick pass of the deburring tool, this is a really, really great print despite these relatively thin walls that are on curves. So at this point, I did decide to do a little bit of research and watch a couple YouTube videos so that I could actually learn from people who've done this before me. Novel idea. And lo and behold, yeah, you're not really supposed to use a belt printer for thin walls or round organic shapes, which explains the trouble I've been having. Oh, also, while watching this great video by Adam from PowerBelt 3D, I did realize that I actually haven't been using one of the most legendary capabilities of a belt printer that I had no idea about, which was the fact that it can actually print in mid-air if you orient your parts correctly.
Several days later.
Okay, so I felt like I just would not have done this video justice until I had shown you all what you really want to see, which is this printer printing a 90-degree overhang relative to the build plate. Heck, I myself honestly barely believed that it was actually going to work. Now, I actually needed a smaller step stool around the office that's easier to move around when I need to get to the top of some really tall printers, so I decided to go for broke, and I pulled the model that you're seeing on screen into Blender. I stretched it out so it would be taller, and then I scaled it to the maximum Z height possible with this printer, and I hit print. That was nearly 3 days ago, and the result was this. A 1.4 kilo, 4 perimeter, 20% infill monstrosity that took about 53 hours to print, and man, it looks awesome. The quality, honestly, is really quite impressive, and I think it's actually more impressive that this pre-release printer managed to churn it out with absolutely no hiccups. I actually even got the chance to test out both the filament runout sensor and the filament clog detection because I didn't splice the filament very well, and they both worked absolutely flawlessly. I also probably could have used some support under these initial bridges, but I mean, who cares? This is a functional part. So I guess the question is it actually functional? In other words, is it actually going to hold my entire weight? Or as Joel would say, will it hold one full Jonathan? Well, there's only one way to find out. So, unfortunately, because there's holidays coming up and my kids are home from daycare, that is all that we have time for this week. But I have to say that I'm honestly really, really excited about this printer, and I am genuinely looking forward to playing with it much, much more. To be honest, it's really not every day that I need to print something bigger than my 350 by 350 Voron can do. But I do think that a big part of that is because up until now, my kind of creativity and considerations have been limited by what I've been able to actually print. So it's kind of this Roger Bannister 4-minute mile thing, but for size of 3D prints that I would conceptualize. So now that I do have a bigger printer, I have a feeling that I'm going to have many more ideas for bigger parts, and that you're going to be seeing a lot of things like this on the channel pretty soon, even if it's just printing out entire walls of honeycomb storage wall in one fell swoop. But to be completely honest, the part that I'm actually the most excited about is just having a printer that I can leave running, connected to Octo Everywhere for remote access, and accepting prints while I'm not in the studio. I can't tell you guys how many times a week I have to head back to the studio in the evening after my kids go to bed so that I can clear the print bed on a printer so that I can then start another print. So having the ability to just add prints to queue and keep the prints flowing without any human intervention is a major perk for someone like me. Now, you might think that it's annoying to have to relearn things like which overhangs will work and which way to orient the parts and how models can be designed, but it honestly reminds me of the excitement of my early days of the 3D printing journey when I had to learn the hard way that you can't print PLA at 180 degrees, or that TPU has to print slower than other materials. I've said time and time again that one of the things I love most about this hobby is that it always gives you more to learn. And I think that having yet another format of 3D printer in my arsenal is going to prove really useful, but also just a really fun challenge of more things I can learn. Now, if you're interested in checking out the all-new IdeaFormer IR3 V2, it is available for pre-order now using the link in the description. So let's see. On this channel, I've now tried out bed slingers, Core XY printers, upside down printers, resin printers, and I'm currently building a tool changer. I think that pretty much Wait a minute. What about Delta printers?